Welcome to the Green Lab Futures Talking Social Innovation podcast with your host, me, Scott Douglas. We'll be bringing you the conversations that we are having with industry, education and the community to help us develop and shape our views and understanding on the future roles of social innovation. We hope you enjoy. Okay, so welcome to our one-on-one chat with Shaun de Vries. Welcome, Shaun. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Scotty. Thanks for having me back.
No problems. And we're sitting here looking at what the future possibilities bring us. To reflect on where we are right now, I'd be keen to hear a bit more, or actually a lot more, about your background in the hospitality industry and what really drove you when you're in that space.
That's a great question. I suppose to give some context, I've been in the hospitality industry for over sort of 22, 23 years now. Born and bred from South Australia, but have lucky to worked in hospitality for the last 6 years in Melbourne, and been privileged enough to work in South Australia, Brisbane, Perth, and then Melbourne. So I've seen a lot of the country, which has been really great. Mainly worked in bakeries, cafes, restaurants for that period of time. And then the last 5 years had my own consulting brand, which I started, called Pantry Consulting, which delves into sort of operations, system processes, recruitment, and strategy for the hospitality industry, which leads me to many different types of brands that I work with, which is really fun. And then about 3 years ago, I started a hospitality podcast, which has had a couple of different names, but we rebranded at the start of 2021 to be called Principle of Hospitality, or what we acronym as PO, because it's a lot easier to say. And we talk to people who supply or are working in the industry from all around Australia and also internationally about their experiences, what they've learnt, what they're looking forward to, and trying to be a really positive voice, and a bit like we sort of say it's a bit of a mentor kind of podcast. So if you're sort of coming up in your career in the hospitality industry, you're likely to learn something from the people that we have on as guests. So I've been really lucky to do that as well. Yeah,
that sounds really awesome to create that voice for the industry, because we've seen over the last kind of 16 months, and my apologies, we do have a live audience with us today. We've got a family of magpies that are sitting just in front of me, so if the sound is a bit off, my apologies.
Well, okay.
Sorry, shake that off. If talking about the voice within the hospitality space, we're seeing that as being a real critical component right now, aren't we?
Yeah, 100%. I think look, the hospitality industry is so broad, right? Many people from different facets of life come into it for different reasons, and that means there's a lot of different opinions on where the hospitality industry is and should go. And I think that was always bubbling underneath the surface before COVID, and now it's really bubbled up. We have these sort of real schools of thought about how the industry should be run. What do we need to be looking forward to? What do we need to let go of? How to create positive reform? All these different things. So I think, I feel blessed every day to have conversations with people who are very varied and very different, and be that sort of nice center point in which people feel comfortable about having a conversation about their own opinion about the industry, which is really cool.
That is a good point about where the industry can go in the future, because previously I had a conversation around the agriculture sector and how that space is seeing it really hard to attract people to work in that space, and my naive view just kind of said, hey, why don't we train people up locally to do that work? And boy, was I shut down. But it's a bit of it's the chicken or the egg type scenario, because hospitality is almost like a part of that supply chain component, which is, well, I suppose it's a part of, and it's such a big component of it. Where do you see some of these changes happening, and do we see them happening soon, or is it more in the future?
I think probably the short answer to your question is both. I think we're going to see certain parts parts of the industry like technology really come up and be part of every single facet of what we do in a much more forward-facing role than it was before. COVID's really caught up technology into the hospitality industry by way of ordering applications, booking systems, obviously things like websites, tracing of guests, ordering of stock, obviously social media marketing, all these things which have sort of sat there, which haven't been fully utilized, are now being utilized. So I think those kind of things will definitely come through. I think sustainability and food waste, which obviously we've talked about before, is definitely a growing conversation, which is not just a nice thought bubble anymore. Like, it's definitely part of, especially new owners, up and coming owners in the industry, part of what they do, their 101s. It's not something that's a nice to have anymore. It's definitely important that we think about food sustainability, food waste, what kind of customers we're servicing, the sustainability of packaging for takeaway. All those kind of things are really important. It's going to be interesting to see where sort of wages and employment goes in the industry. So I think you obviously just touched on, obviously, agriculture. Part of the reason why it's hard to get a national workforce, I suppose, around that, and rather than using backpackers and foreign workers, is because of pay, and because what farmers can afford to pay or have been used to paying for labour to actually pick fruit and vegetables inside our industry, as opposed to what people are willing to pay in a supermarket or a market setting, or even into a restaurant or a food establishment. So the menu pricing for a lot of different food items hasn't changed in the last 20 years, where obviously the price of producing that food has. And what happens is that something had to be squeezed, and that was always going to be wages, which has stagnated there. So I think wages are very interesting. We're obviously having a very open discussion in the industry about how much people should be paid fairly with inside front of house, back of house management of different restaurants and cafes and such. So I think that's going to evolve and change. And then I think we'll see a lot more automation, robotics, dark kitchens, delivery that will come through. I think that'll be the biggest change moving forward. Dark
kitchen. I just heard that. I haven't heard that before. What does
that so like dark kitchen or cloud kitchens or delivery only. So basically establishments which only have kitchens and no customer facing, which are just built for delivery. So it might be a facility which has 20 different kitchens, which have 20 different leases in those sites, just doing delivery brands, and inside one kitchen they may be doing 2 upwards of 4 kind of brands inside that one kitchen. So they might do a salad brand, a fried chicken brand, a dessert brand, and a beverage brand, all within the one kitchen, which will be a big way of how the industry moves. We're seeing that happen extensively through North America, through Southeast Asia, and through the Middle East at the moment. And it's been slow to pick up here because the price of delivery is very different here to what it is in the US, especially. So, but I think that'll come to an even keel, and that'll be the thing that comes through pretty strongly.
Yeah, right. That is a really fascinating concept, and I can see how that would kind of grow with momentum here in Australia. Just that model that you mentioned, by having the 4 different options,
yes,
all cooked and prepped and just delivered. Then I suppose that connection with the DoorDash, the Deliveroo, the Uber Eats, the food delivery service, it becomes the pinnacle of how the food gets prepared and then delivered to the house, which is what we've seen it happen. So it might have been easily in Melbourne. I talk about that from being in Gippsland, and we don't have food delivery service here unless the restaurants are really friendly and happy to. What was the transition like during that process of kind of being restricted movement and those food delivery services having to kind of step up? Was it received really well?
Like, it was an interesting process. I think you obviously saw quick service restaurants and fast food restaurants doubled down on what they were doing before, and really just, all of a sudden, instead of delivery sort of being 15 to 20% of the overall turnover, it became 95%. So they really had to think about having their websites up to date, having all their menus up to date on the different marketplaces, if they were going to fulfill their own delivery, a bit like what's happening in Gippsland. That was happening to excess in Melbourne as well, because we had JobKeeper. So we had a whole lot of staff that people want to keep, so they're fulfilling their own deliveries. And then you had, fast casual restaurants and premium restaurants who all of a sudden moved to things like at-home boxes, on the Providore network with Shane Delia, and really move into a delivery space where they never moved into delivery before. So that was just a big learning curve for them to all of a sudden think about how can I bring the value for a customer to want to spend $40 or $50 a head at home to have something delivered to their house. So I think that's obviously the biggest learning to come out of the last year or so internationally, is how those brands can be stable and basically build what I call different verticals or different methods of sale for their business. Yeah.
Absolutely, because as we move back into face-to-face, they could be the best delivered food service in that local area, but if they don't have a face-to-face, or they're, say, a ghost kitchen only, that they can not lose perspective, but they could lose that percentage of the customer or the consumer market, couldn't they?
Absolutely. It's just been a race of catch up, and talking about technology before, like making sure that brands really had their tech in place, and most of them now do, and the brands that have done all the right things in the last year or so and thought about the different verticals are now starting to slowly grow and do more brands and do more events and do more pop-ups and do different types of ways to make revenue, because they know now they've had a live example on the fact that anyone can shut them down at any point. So they need to think about how they actually continue to make money in order to keep their business surviving and then thriving past any kind of lockdowns that we have. Yeah,
absolutely. And when we look at where this industry is moving, and you've mentioned there that there is this want and need to shift with technology, to adapt and to pivot. No, I used it. So, yes. But we've seen a lot of businesses kind of move into that space. What percentage would you say have adopted this new approach? And do you see there being like some laggards that will probably never adopt it?
Oh yeah, there'll always be people who don't want to and who find it really tough to move forward. They want to keep things as they always were, and they want everyone to change around them. And that's a really hard position to be in. And I think you have to listen to those kind of people who make that decision, because I think there's always things to learn. But in the end, they'll be left behind, because the whole industry needed to move forward. It just needed to be this push. So I think if you look at numbers, I would say 90% of venues are doing some kind of delivery in some way, shape, or form. Whether that be probably say 80%, and the other 20% is using some sort of, either they're closed and they're holding, but they're lucky enough to hold, or they're doing just a pickup option. So they might not believe in delivery or fulfilling their own deliveries themselves. So yeah, but a lot of other brands have introduced what we call basically here in Australia like a general store concept or something like that with inside their restaurant. Americans would know that as a bodega. So doing different. Maybe if they were a high level cafe, they'd be selling bread as a retail option. They'd be selling jams and preserves. They'd be selling pasta sauces and things like that as different things with inside their venue. So if they didn't want to do delivery, then they would do something like that to make their bricks and mortar have more value, so that people can go to them and feel like they're more part of their everyday life. Like if I can go down my local cafe, get a really cracking coffee, also get my bread from a bread maker I really trust, who's 15 kilometers from this particular location, get my eggs out and get my staples there, and I'm supporting that venue, like that's a really positive thing. So we're seeing what we're seeing across Australia, but especially in more lockdown markets like Melbourne, is a hyper local focus and a real understanding now that hospitality is all about community, and hospitality delivers community in every single city. And in Melbourne, we're lucky, and Victoria, we're lucky enough that that's a real fabric of the community, and we deliver excitement, positive experiences, even in times of lockdown. And I'm probably asking to say that it's more important during times of lockdown. And I think the conversations that people have had with their baristas has been critically important in the last 12 or so months. So I think people have woken up to how important those hospitality venues are to them.
Absolutely. And that conversation point that you just made, Ben, with the baristas, it's like this, I think this notion that we maybe took for granted of within the workplace, the water cooler conversation that I'm hearing a lot of about now, and this casual, accidental conversation that we used to have a lot, we don't now, and we're looking for channels and avenues to kind of have these conversations. If I can just move this to your podcast, because that's where you're having those conversations now, and you're providing people with a really fascinating insight to what's happening within the industry, not just locally but globally. So you're doing a bit of a global approach by looking far and wide. What are you hearing? What are you hearing globally?
It's quite interesting, Scotty. Like, the reason I decided to not just do a local podcast and to make sure that we were especially in the early days, to make sure that I was speaking to people internationally, was I wanted to show the audience that the fact that the person in California or the person in London or the person in Johannesburg is maybe going through slightly different parts of the industry or different challenges, but they're very similar as well. And that should make you feel a bit more content that the hospitality industry at the moment has pretty much the same unique challenges. They're slightly different in different markets. America, as is Australia, as the UK, like all struggling for staff, all struggling to bring back competent people to deliver on the hospitality experiences, to cook food, to manage venues. Like that is probably the most critical thing. In places like the UK, Singapore, Australia, it's probably the pandemic has probably shown up how much rent that we were paying as an industry and how that wasn't sustainable. In America, it's a slightly different model, but it is still pretty heavy skewed. And probably the other thing is that we need to bring up menu prices across the world, and food has been a very interesting loss leader for a lot of brands for a long time, and they've made most of their money on beverage, especially things like alcohol, and I think this time has highlighted the value of food moving forward, both in the price point and food waste and sustainability and all these different things. And I think now we're seeing that. So I think we're seeing the hospitality industry to look to do more with less. That's across food, beverage, staffing, size of venue, all these different things, is a more with less philosophy. And I think that's definitely a global situation that won't stop. It'll just double down during this time and move forward.
Yeah, wow. And that's a really fascinating approach, because this idea of doing more with less means that output to buy, like to source your suppliers, to be paying rent, doing all of these things that I think as bricks and mortar businesses have potentially been taken for granted the last kind of couple of decades, and then it does take a major shift in the economy to see how that approach can be reshaped. And I know, like I like to explore the donut economy that was talked about in the 2040 documentary around how we can actually grow stuff locally instead of having to buy our food from a long way away.
Yes.
And there are some components of that do definitely work, and then there's others that just don't make sense.
Yeah.
And for that to happen in the hospitality industry for Melbourne, gosh, we'd be digging up a big circle of maybe it's land that used to have farms on it that we used to grow produce on.
Yeah.
But it's it's almost reimagining what we can do with vertical gardens on the side of buildings, or spaces around the city that could be utilised down the sides of train tracks to grow food, and to have this kind of want to do more with less, which I feel is a really good kind of notion moving forward. Based on everything that we've just talked about, what's your hope? And maybe if we use this as a bit of a parting message, what's your hope for the industry and for not just Melbourne, but across Australia in the next couple of years?
It's a great question.
Break open the cookies.
Look, I'll probably put it on two different fronts. I think my hope for consumers is that they understand now the value of the engagement they have with their hospitality venue, and to really appreciate that even more than they did before. And we're lucky in Australia to have really great customers across the whole. But I think people really thought about that during this time. And also to know the value of product and how much people should be paying for food if they want artisan, providor, good quality product. How much things like organic, sustainably produced, free range, all those kind of things cost money in supply chain. So we need to wake up to that as a society worldwide, but especially in Australia. And I suppose from an industry standpoint, the value of people inside the workplace, not just from how much should I pay you, but how should I treat you? How deep do I go to really care about you and engage with you as a staff member to make sure I'm looking after you in the workplace, but also outside the workplace? I think that's something that is being really important, and I think the great brands are really thinking about now as they move forward. And my hope is that we get more female leadership and diverse leadership in our industry. Having different voices at the table leads to different conversations and different outcomes. And what I'm seeing with brands that are coming through in the last 24, 36 months, but have really shone during pandemics, are female and diverse leadership brands. And I think that's only a benefit. If there's more people like me who aren't on conversations about how the industry should change, I think that's a positive. I'm trying to slowly sort of almost do myself out of a job of talking about the industry and have other people take the voice. And that's what we're trying to do with Poe. And that's what you'll see in the next sort of 12 months for us, is different voices in regards to Poe and what we talk about, because we know there are different conversations that have got to be had, because there are different people at the table having them. So that's how we know that change evolves, through different leadership.
Yeah, wow, that's a really powerful message, because it is about that different voice, which gives us a different perspective and opinion in how we shape the vision moving forward. And please don't stop giving the voice that you're giving to the industry, because I do get that when we're outspoken, often we're the easy targets to if you're pointing out something really obvious that's deliberately been left alone, which I always put my hand up as doing. But don't stop doing it, Shaun. And thank you very much for giving us your time to chat about your industry insights and background.
Oh, no dramas. Thanks for everything you're doing. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you for your time, Shaun. Cheers.